Good morning. Good morning. Right there. Okay, got it. All right. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those of you who are on the live stream. If you're watching from home in Washington, D.C., I hope you have coffee for this one at 2:30 in the morning. Really excited to be here on Energy Day, COP29 in Baku. I am Eric Gibbs. I lead global strategy for the Clean Energy Buyers Association. CEBA is a membership-based trade association in the United States. We have over 400 members, including some of the world's largest clean energy buyers, as well as suppliers and service providers. CEBA's mission is to decarbonize the global power sector. Very modest endeavor. So once we finish with that, I'm sure we will move on to other challenges. And the way that we do that is we try to facilitate markets for clean energy. That's access to clean energy, procurement mechanisms for clean energy, and trying to train and educate supply chain companies of our members so that they can embark upon their clean energy journey and thereby support the aggressive clean energy goals and objectives of our members. I am super excited about this session, Innovative Partnerships and Solutions for a Clean, Reliable Grid. We are going to cover a lot of ground in this session. We're going to talk about things like load growth. We're going to talk about key policy barriers, and more importantly, what are the solutions that utilities and clean energy buyers are bringing to the table, both themselves and in partnership, either public or private, to try to solve some of the challenges and actually take advantage of some of the opportunities that we're dealing with in a rapidly changing market, both at the national level, at the subnational level, and globally. So really excited to take this conversation forward, and really excited to introduce our panelists here. So we have Julie Taylor from National Grid, Caroline Choi from SoCal Edison, Edison International, and Carrie Constable from Amazon. Thank you so much for joining me here on this panel. Rather than introduce the panelists myself, I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and their organizations and companies. Then we're going to segue into a moderated discussion. And we're then going to turn it over to you in the audience for questions. We're going to make this as fun and engaging and participatory as possible. So I'm just going to start right here with you, Julie. Please.
Thanks, Eric. Hopefully not have a health and safety crisis over the lead here. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Taylor. I'm from National Grid. National Grid is a public listed company. We're listed in London and in New York. We run businesses in the UK and in the US, and 90% of our businesses are regulated utilities. So we run the transmission and part of the distribution system in the UK, and we run transmission in New York. We run distribution of electricity and gas in New York and Massachusetts, and we have some innovative businesses as well, which I might come back to later, Eric. So where are we on our journey? Well, we intend to be a leader of the energy transition. That was a decision we made 5 years ago. We felt we were a very large networks utility company. We felt we were in a position to be a global leader in a clean, fair and affordable transition to green energy. So that is our mission. We have been undertaking some strategic changes to do that. So we announced a year and a half ago that we were going to focus on electricity networks, as we felt they were part of the future of the energy system. And we announced some very, very significant investments earlier this year as part of our annual results in May, and I just want to say a bit more about those. It's interesting, we're going to start with load-related growth in networks because that is very significant in the UK and in the US. We have announced that we're going to be investing £60 billion, that's some $70 billion, in UK and US networks, and that's about roughly 50-50. Our business is roughly 50-50 between the UK and the US. The most significant amount of that is going to go into building out the network to deal, obviously, with the massive new load we're going to get from renewables and the decarbonisation of the electricity system. The interesting thing is in the UK, this has now moved to a quite centrally planned approach, and the UK government has indicated that they're going to produce a central strategic network plan, and we already have a sort of transitional version of that to work to, so that we can see roughly at least of that 30 billion, we can see what 25 billion of it is going to be over the next 5 years. We sort of know where it's going to be, and we know what sorts of schemes it's going to be delivering. In the US, we don't have the same situation, which I think is interesting, and I wonder if some of what we need to do is create this level of certainty in the US as well, because we're working to a much shorter time horizon, and we're not in the sort of position that we are in the UK, where we've got really clear program, which gives you not only a lot of lead time to get your planning and consenting and everything else sorted out, but the other thing about it is these days of constrained supply chain, it also allows you to think about engaging with your suppliers on a strategic basis and a programmatic basis. So I think there's possibly some lessons from the recent developments in the UK that we'd quite like to see in the US. And I might say a bit more about that as we get into the discussion. So, shall I pass over to Caroline?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Caroline Choi with Edison International and Southern California Edison. At Southern California Edison, it's a electric-only, wires-focused utility in serving about 15 million residents in southern, central, and coastal California. And then we also have Trio, which is an energy services advisory company that serves global Fortune 50 and Fortune 500 companies with data-driven approaches to their environmental risk and sustainability efforts. So I would say as we focus on the future, certainly we're looking at mostly in California, but also globally around this clean energy future and the transition to that clean energy economy. In Southern California, what we're seeing in demand growth is less driven by factors like data centers, which is quite a topic in the US and elsewhere. It's somewhat driven that way, but when we look at our load, and it has grown, our forecast just in 2 years, so from this year compared to 2022, we see a 35% demand growth over the next 10 years. But that demand is driven by a few factors. So it's really diverse growth. A third is about electrification, with mobility really driving that electrification in California. A third is from new home starts, so we're still seeing construction happening in California, new home build, primarily in our inland area where land is a little less expensive, and California is moving towards all-electric home building, so that's another driver of the demand growth. And then a third is in our commercial industrial space, somewhat from data centers, but mostly from additional activity like moving to cleaner technologies that utilize electricity. And so we are seeing that demand grow quite significantly, and have put forward a rate case at our Utilities Commission that demonstrates the need to invest in the grid for reliability, resiliency, and then readiness for what's coming. California, as many of you know, has very aggressive, ambitious climate goals. I think we will continue to stay on that path, and in order to achieve that, electrification is a key part of that, and grid investment and grid readiness is going to be essential for customers to shift to greater electrification and have the confidence that the grid will be ready to serve their needs. So we'll talk more about that. Look forward to it. I'll pass this on. Oh, Carrie, you have a mic.
I do, but
Okay.
I'm normally short, but this is actually shorter than. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Constable. I'm Director of Decarbonization Strategy at Amazon. And I have been at Amazon for 6 months, so I know a good amount of the amazing work that we're doing on clean energy, but there may be some specifics that I will, that if you ask me about, I will take offline at a later time. So Amazon, as many of you may know, is the largest corporate procurer of clean energy in the world, and we have been matching in 2023 we achieved 100% matching of all of our operations, all of the energy usage across our operations, fulfillment centers, grocery stores, etc., data centers, with renewable energy. So that was something that we're quite proud of. But we were involved in the creation of what was Reba and now Seba. And Amazon is deploying a lot of different solutions to both improve the grid and expand the availability of clean energy. And now renewable energy, first and foremost, solar and wind, oftentimes through long-term power purchase agreements. But we're also, as recent news indicates, exploring other sources of clean energy like SMRs, so nuclear. We also, which I'll get into a little bit, we do a lot of this clean energy procurement and investment through partnerships. So whether it's partnerships with regulators or partnerships with fellow companies, we started the Emissions First partnership where we are collaborating on a lot of grid modernization technologies, really trying to alleviate a lot of bottlenecks to the expansion of clean energy. Trying to work with regulators to shorten permitting times, etc. So we're very active in and very committed to the build out of clean energy and doing what we can to modernize the grid and accelerate the availability at the speed and scale we need.
Well, thanks so much for the introductions. So our first topic that we're going to tackle here on the panel is around load growth. And load growth, maybe that's a sort of an insider term. We're talking about growing power demand, which in the U.S. Is a relatively new phenomenon. Over the past 2 decades, demand growth has been relatively flat in the United States. And now that's changing. And it's changing for a number of reasons. I think, data centers and AI are getting a lot of attention. But I think, Caroline, as you mentioned, in California, 1 out of every 4 vehicles is now an EV. And so, I think that there was a projection of load growth that was coming with electrification. California, I think, is seeing it already. And maybe, the advent of AI and the data centers, to power the computation, that's just simply accelerating what was already projected to happen. But I want to dive into this. Sometimes it's seen as a big challenge, right? Maybe for utilities or clean energy buyers. But is it also an opportunity, for the grid and for technologies, emerging technologies? And that's something I'd love to dig in on, both in the United States at the federal level, at the subnational level, and even globally. I should say that in a meeting I had in Japan, for the first time, the stick is, the graph is going up. That demand is actually growing in Japan after being flat for decades. So it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. And I think, everyone, regulators, policymakers, utilities, and companies that purchase clean energy are trying to grapple with this. So I'm not going to call on anyone. I'll take any volunteers who want to offer their perspective here on the panel related to load growth and how you're dealing with that. Thank you.
So I can certainly kick it off and welcome the perspectives of my fellow panelists. Yeah, so I think in California, like I said, we do have that diversity of load growth. I should also just say, thanks to the America's All-In Pavilion, where we are, and SEPA for hosting this panel. I think it's interesting to think back about the history of the America's All-In Pavilion, given where we are today, and I think we do say California staying on track with the climate goals, as I said. So the demand growth that we're seeing, like I said, is more diverse than what maybe many of our peer utilities are experiencing. And I think what we do have the opportunity, we do think of it as an opportunity more than a challenge, to test new ways to plan the grid. And it's something that we are doing at Edison. In the past, we had planned around different aspects of the grid. So certainly after the 17 and 18 wildfires, we stood up a wildfire risk mitigation team, very focused on how to manage our wildfire risks and to harden the grid, in which we've done a tremendous amount of investment to harden the grid, improve our situational awareness, and really drive down the risk of catastrophic wildfire caused by utility equipment. In the last 5 years, we've seen that risk reduced by 85 to 90% in the high fire risk area. Then we had an infrastructure replacement group that was looking at older equipment and the time to replace that equipment, and go to the commission with our analysis and justification for replacing older poles or older conduit, et cetera. And what we've done is now centralized all the planning, and so instead of looking at it from a issue like wildfire or aging infrastructure or load growth, just looking at the system and planning all those aspects of the grid at the same time, so that we're going to a circuit and looking at it for aging infrastructure, for wildfire risk, for demand growth, and then building a plan around it that way instead. And so it can speed the process for getting work done. I think it also improves the customer experience at the end of the day, so you're not going to the same circuit taking an outage 3 times, you're taking outage 1 time to solve all these issues associated with that particular part of the electric system. So it's an opportunity to improve our process, to speed our process. It's an opportunity to go educate policymakers about what those needs are on the system, to talk to our customers as well. And it's an opportunity to then hopefully speed the process on the regulatory side. We do see a need for greater speed due to the growth that we're seeing on the electric system. Our forecast for California in hitting net zero by 2045 is 80% demand growth between now and 2045. That's significant, and will take a significant amount of grid investment. And we're currently not on track to hit our 2030 target of 40% below 1990 levels. So we hit our 2020 target of being at 1990 levels despite all the economic growth in California, but we're not currently on track to hit 2030. And in order to achieve it, we have to speed up our process and at the same time meet this demand growth forecast, which we see as increasing activity on the grid, like 10 times on the distribution level and 4 times on the transmission system. So siting and permitting process reforms, how do we get that faster? Just as we're trying to improve our processes inside the company as well, so that together we can really reduce the time frames to make those significant investments. And I think data centers are particularly challenging because they can bring significant load in such a short period of time. I was just in a meeting earlier where a data center provider was saying that they could build a data center in 7 months, 300 megawatts of demand in 7 months. That is just not the speed at which the utility currently operates to be able to meet that demand. It's not even on the utility side, it's also on the regulatory side. To be able to get the approvals in that amount of time is not today what is done. And so I do think it's an opportunity to work together, utilities, their customers, and the policymakers to speed that process so that we can meet our customers' expectations, because the thing that data centers are providing is a lot of solutions for the future that we're all relying on, and a lot of energy security solutions as well. So that's something that we all are, I think, supportive of and wanting to make sure is successful.
Julie, I really appreciate your perspective, from National Grid, both, in the UK and reflecting the comments that Caroline just made, and maybe even in New England, where National Grid serves my sister.
Hopefully well. So a lot of resonance really with what Caroline's just said. We're facing a very similar picture in New York and in New England. And I think this point you make, Caroline, about the speed at which some of the new technologies, particularly data centres, are creating new demand really, really quickly is something that we probably haven't really planned for and prepared for. And we're starting to see difficulties with customers on that. We're not meeting customers' expectations. So that is one area for a definite rethink, I think, of how we go about things. I mean, as Caroline says, this demand growth is not something that is just happening, is it? This is something we want, because we want to transition to clean energy. And in any scenario, you are talking about a very significant additional use of electricity, right? So we are very keen to provide for the right sort of networks that can take that load. It's interesting comparing our US with our UK experience in the UK, which, as you know, is a very early adopter of particularly green renewable technologies. Interestingly, I think it's fair to say the grid did not keep up, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing a massive upgrade in the UK now at breakneck speed. And I think most of us think in the UK that was a failure really of seeing what was coming and planning for it. And I think there is scope in the US perhaps to be a little bit more considered. The US is on the same journey, but perhaps in a pace which could now be managed. I think the other thing I'd pick up and reflect on Caroline's point is this holistic thing that utilities need to do now. We've ended up in the same place as Edison. So in both New York and Massachusetts, we have now comprehensive rate cases agreed for an upgrade that will deal with many things at once, including load and the renewal that's needed for obsolete equipment and innovation and all sorts of different aspects of the grid. So I would end on the same note that Caroline ended up on, which is if we can persuade our policymakers and regulators and get our own companies to adapt and work differently, this is a huge opportunity for a much more planned and ordered future, and delivering for customers at a very, very low cost in terms of grid build out, and hopefully much, much cheaper energy in the future.
Thank you so much. And Carrie, you mentioned in your introductory remarks SMRs. Yesterday, I was listening to Pedro Pizarro of Edison talking about clean firm. This is perhaps a new lexicon. What are we talking about with clean firm, and how does that fit within the load growth paradigm that we're seeing now and that we're going to see moving forward?
I think generally, I mean, just first I want to just concur with what my colleagues, what they have said. I mean, I do think this is an opportunity, and we're working with some of the most aging infrastructure in the world where it has been developed, and then of course we have an opportunity to leapfrog in emerging markets where infrastructure is just emerging or has not yet been regionalized or nationalized, et cetera. So I think there's really an opportunity lens that we at Amazon have on load growth in general. I mean, in terms of clean firm power, I mean, we just know we need it, and the integration now, it's we want to ensure that there's consistent availability of clean energy, that it is safe, that it is and that it is easily integratable with the grid. And so so we do see SMRs as a key opportunity to bridge that gap in shorter time spans. In addition, I mean, we are quite committed to deploying grid enhancing technologies, and that both on the hardware and the software side. I mean, so looking at VPPs, virtual power plants, looking at software solutions to redirect to underutilized portions of the grid. So there's a lot of, whether it's AI empowered or powered or just tech enabled solutions to speed up the efficiency improvements that we all need on the grid. I think that's also a key opportunity. So I think looking at this as a hardware and a software challenge and opportunity is where we all I think will benefit. And again, SMRs as that firm power, one solution. There's no silver bullet. So I think that's where we don't want to talk about SMRs as the silver bullet. There is not one, but the integration of all that has been talked about today is what's needed, and SMRs are one piece of it. But without grid enhancing technologies, without improving work with regulators, without real collaboration between the buyers and utilities, we won't get there.
I think, let me just add on the clean, firm energy resources. So, we just put out a white paper in September talking about reaching net zero for Edison ourselves, so how our plan, and because we're a wires-focused business, significant parts of the plan are reliant on the state moving forward with its plans, particularly around clean energy. So one of the things we talk about is, as we try and meet this growing demand on a schedule that meets our customers' expectations, clean, firm energy resources are critical to that. So small modular reactors are one piece. California has some hurdles to overcome to achieve that in the state. Other clean, firm energy resources are things like advanced geothermal. Southern California Edison just inked a deal a few months ago with Fervo around their new advanced geothermal facilities, and that's a little over 300 megawatts that we'll be bringing online. Others would be, some of these technologies that additional, maybe wind and energy, solar, but with battery energy storage, so paired together. It's essential that be able to cover the demand over the 24/7 period, and that's where the clean, firm energy resources are so critical to meeting those demands of customers, particularly like something like a data center, which has to have that 24/7, and not backslide on the path towards zero carbon. So that's the essential role that they play, and some of these technologies still have essential work to be done. We understand that, but we're saying that exactly to what Carrie said, it's not a silver bullet, but a need to invest in multiple technologies to see how they advance and get them on a scale to meet those demands sort of in that mid to future time frame. In the near term, we have existing technologies that can meet that demand.
I'd just add one last thing actually to Kerry's reminding us about grid enhancing technologies, which is really, really important. It's very interesting about COP. It's sort of, for me, it's had a bit of an evolution from we need to stop burning carbon-based things to, right, okay, so where are we going to get the energy from? And then over the last few years, it's been, now we need to move the energy around, so what are we going to do to reinforce the grid? And as we've got into, right, now we need to reinforce the grid, we've also got into, well, there isn't enough supply chain in the world to do this. And also, it's maybe not the most efficient thing to do. And I think there's a realisation coming that actually, if we're going to do this well, we're going to be really creative and thoughtful about it. And that, as Kerry says, hard and soft technologies for getting the best out of the existing grid and building any new grid to be a paradigm shift and work differently. So we are investing in that through, we have an investment business called National Grid Partners, who explore innovative technologies and have got a number of grid enhancing technologies that we're looking at, some 80 of them that are involved in our businesses. Everything from designing the conductor better to critically how AI can help you route it properly through the system. So it's a very exciting area to explore.
And maybe I'll just put a plug in on that GRIP program, which has helped companies to move these technologies forward. We were just a recipient with PG&E and the state of California on a huge GRIP grant.
Caroline, can you define GRIP for everyone?
What is GRIP? It's under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Grid resilience and investment.
Didn't want to put you on the spot. I just want everyone to know what it is.
Grid resilience innovation partnership. Got it.
Yeah.
GRIP. But that funding is essential to trying to leapfrog the technology forward and utilize it for demonstration projects to test its ability. And one of these that we're going to use the money for our portion is on some grid enhancing technologies, particularly around transmission, to be able to move more power through existing rights of way, these corridors, because today transmission takes so long to get licensed, permitted, and constructed and into operation. In California, we estimate 10 to 12 years. With all that demand, the grid enhancing technologies are going to be really critical to meet the demand in the near term. And we are very appreciative of the GRIP grant that we were part of to help move that forward in California.
Fantastic. Last night I was at an event on AI and sustainability, and it was not related at all to demand. And I felt that was really missing, because AI, I think, has huge application in trying to optimize the grid that we actually have. And that, I agree, Julie, is really, really exciting. And so as opposed to we need to just build more and more, how can we optimize essentially the 20th century grid that served us so well and maximize that before we invest trillions of dollars in infrastructure? There will be a need for new infrastructure. But I love the optimism about load growth. At SEBA, we share that optimism. We think that this is just a massive opportunity to drive more clean energy and to drive emerging technologies. So thank you. Yeah, I agree. Load growth is good. It's a massive economic opportunity for the United States. So just pivoting here to policy, market, maybe tech. There are a lot of challenges. I think we've touched upon some of them. I think yesterday I heard permitting reform 17 times across a variety of panels. So there are a lot of challenges, particularly I think on the policy side, whether you're talking about the federal or global. Well, how can utilities and companies actually help policymakers and regulators do what needs to be done?
That is quite a big question, Eric, isn't it? I'll pick out a couple of bits of it, I suppose. So I think we're all agreed that we need to build out grid at an unprecedented scale, and that's going to be in both the UK and the US. We're going to build something in National Grid like 4 times as much in the next 5 years as we've built in the last decade. So we're talking about something which is going to have to be more agile. It's going to have a totally different relationship with the supply chain. It's going to have a totally different relationship with communities and with planning authorities. And when you add all that together, it can feel quite daunting. But actually, if you take it piece by piece and think about the opportunities in there as well, sticking with the theme of this is both, a change, but also a major opportunity. If you start with planning, I think, and this is something which is global, I think, except in places where, they have a totally different idea of democracy. I think most of us are empathetic to those communities who perhaps find that infrastructure is not attractive, at least on a visual and, environmental level. And I think there's much more to do as industry and with our policymaker colleagues in government, much more to do to explain the benefits of this, not just in terms of net zero, not just in terms of energy security, although those are important things, but also in terms of economic development, industrial strategy, jobs, local opportunities, etc. And I don't feel that in either of our jurisdictions, either in the US or in the UK, we've done a very good job of that. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think our planning regimes were designed for a different era, and I think federal and state authorities are going to have to be a bit more thoughtful about major infrastructure and how it gets approved, and how local interests are balanced off against statewide and national interests here. So it's a conversation we're also having in the UK. The UK's new government is looking very hard at this and trying to speed it up. I think it's a conversation that needs to happen in the US as well. And finally, on the supply chain, we're of the view, well, historically we've done, I think most utilities have done, and our regulators have relied on us to do this, which is know what we're going to procure and have a spot purchasing event for it, and have the competition for that one thing, and use that competition to demonstrate that you've got value for money for the consumer, or bill payer. And that is a way to get short-term value optimised, but it is not a way to get the scale of the supply chain that we're going to need, and it's not necessarily the way actually to get the most efficient price that you could get, because actually if you can give the supply chain a lot more certainty, they can use things like standardisation, they can invest in innovation, they can invest in skills, they can invest in modern new facilities and use some of Kerry's services to make sure they're optimised, and you can end up with we believe, a much better case for the consumer. And so we are talking to our regulators globally, so US and the UK, about moving to a strategic supplier relationship where we have frameworks of suppliers, we allocate work to them. Another piece of this jigsaw is we have to be clear about our workbook, which is why I go back to where's the plan? Do we know what we're going to be building? If we could have some stable expectations over 10 years and frameworks of suppliers and a sensible method of work allocation, and we could all accept that that was better value for the consumer than running a competition by competition approach, then I think we can crack the supply chain challenge and probably build a foundation for what we're going to have to keep on doing after all. We're talking about this as if it's not for the next 5 or 10 years, but it's actually for the next 25, 30 years, right? So building that foundation in the supply chain we think is pretty important.
Yes, I'll just add that it is a massive amount of education. And in California, as an example, we're challenged with so many new members. We had 34 new members that came in to office in 2022. You have 34 new members that are coming into office as a result of the elections last week. And so you have to spend a lot of time with these new legislators, educating them. I mean, first of all, they weren't around then, many of them. Some have moved just from one body to the other, but most of them are coming in new and weren't around to pass the laws that we are implementing that are driving so much of the need for the grid investment. So you have to start back with, why are we making all these investments? What laws has California already set before you got here? And California is an example where you do see pretty much uniformity across the state and support, not just by policymakers but by customers for the path that we're on. But so you have to go back to that and then talk to them and really show them. I mean, the easiest way is to bring them out into the field, show them the investments that we're making, why we're making them, the benefits that we'll provide. Exactly to Julie's point, it's not just around clean energy and reliability, it's also about the jobs, it's about economic development, it's about workforce development, it's about tax opportunities, all these things that are benefits to the local community. And so that's something that we've already started reaching out to the newly elected members, inviting them to come see parts of our service area that align with their districts and the work that we're doing, because I think it's really critically important that they see it. It's not just a matter of just talking about it.
I think something that's also core as a buyer is true partnership with the utility and true partnership with the subnational government. And Amazon, we recently announced a first of a kind agreement in Mississippi, where with Entergy, where there will be, I think it's I'm just double checking, that's 650 megawatts over the next 3 years, but coupled with investments in upgrading infrastructure over the next 2 decades. And that coupling is quite important. So it's true partnership. It's not only investing in supply, but it's investing in that grid infrastructure. And I think more and more we're looking for those kinds of opportunities with utilities, with subnational governments, et cetera, regulators, so that we are co-collaborators and co-designers in the upgrading of the grid, while also again deploying different solutions. Some is capital investment in upgrading the grid, or upgrading efficiency through technology. So I think, again, it's an all-in approach, and I think the Mississippi deal is quite an interesting one, where it is both supply and an investment in grid improvement over time that changes the dynamic a little bit. One question I do have that maybe we could just take for a future conversation is how to collaborate on for grids that are just building out, and so beyond the U.S. But what does collaboration look like, and what does utility buyer collaboration look like in grids that need to leapfrog? I think that's quite an interesting conversation that I've heard less of at COP, which is interesting, given how emerging market focused we all have to be in the energy transition. So I think it's something just that has been top of mind, and I thought it would be interesting to touch on if there's time in our discussion today.
I would love to dig into that, because everything that we're talking about here and the solutions that you're already implementing from a system perspective, planning, investment, this is exactly what utilities around the world are facing. And to the point of new grids, I mean, I think it's worth recognizing there's still 800 million people in the world that don't have modern energy access, and there's a lot of new grid development that's going to have to happen. So hopefully there are a lot of best practices and lessons that we can share. And I can tell you from in leading our global work, there's a strong desire to learn what are utilities doing and what do buyers need. And I think you're educating policymakers in California. Those same policymakers in Japan and Indonesia, in Thailand, they're looking for education as well. So I'm going to pick up on all of the lessons that I'm learning here and take them internationally.
Yeah, Eric, I also just think that when you talk about that, it is partly that learning is really important. Is how can you apply something that's you're hearing about from one area into another. I think one of the things that we try and do with our community partnerships is some of that, like how do we take it, something that we're learning in California and apply it elsewhere, or something that we hear about that one of our peer utilities is doing. I mean, certainly our trade association is a great example. I think SEBA is another one where you can talk about some of the lessons that you've learned from one area and apply that to other places. It's really a very important benefit to that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's something that at SEBA, that's what we have to do. If we're going to be successful, our mission really is to help decarbonize the power sector. We need to take all the best practices and lessons and try to apply them everywhere. Just in the interest of time, Carrie, you mentioned true partnership. I love that because none of us are going to be successful alone. We need partnerships. We need alliances. Yesterday, Julia, I heard your colleague talk about a variety of initiatives that National Grid is actually involved in partnerships, and maybe you'd care to elaborate on one or more of them and how you're working actively with partners to try to solve some of these challenges.
So we have one of the things we think we're quite good at as a company is working with others. Actually, we've got a long history of that. We are in several joint ventures. We run interconnectors to Europe, and we've partnered there with our opposite numbers on the European side, and their regulators have partnered with our regulator. So there is quite a bit that can be done, and I think this becomes more pressing as you try and join up grids. So you need to be able to partner utility to utility better. The key to it seems to be, as Kerry says, some sort of real understanding of what everyone's common goals are, and making sure that there is genuinely an open and transparent and trusting dialogue, which is easier said than done, right? Everybody says that about every relationship, but it's actually quite difficult sometimes when you've got very different perspectives. So that's one type of partnership that we've fostered and nurtured, and we have similar early joint ventures in the US. We've notably got Community Offshore Wind, which is going to produce a very, very large wind farm off the New York coast, so that's about 3 gigawatts of wind potentially there. And that's a partnership with, again, a utility provider, but a different sort of utility provider, because we've partnered with RWE, who are offshore wind specialists, and they want us because we are grid specialists, and so the intent is that they will build the turbines and we will get the power back to shore and get it into the grid. So there's a lot of opportunity in these massive growth areas for us to engage in new sorts of partnerships to generate the technologies integrated that are needed. But then the third area where we've actually got a business called National Grid Partners, which I may have been the one you were talking about, Eric, was it? So National Grid Partners, we started 5 years ago, and this is really a very different thing for a massive, let's face it, quite bureaucratic utility to be doing. We spotted that there were plenty of nascent and very promising technologies that didn't make it into the market, didn't make it into practice, because they didn't actually have the skills to navigate from a good idea at the beginning through to being scalable to and meeting a huge utilities requirement. So we began a process of putting our own money. We've put about $500 million into this, putting our own money into some promising technologies. And those promising technologies are seed funded by us and grown by us, and then when they're ready, they can partner with our own businesses or other businesses to actually work with a big bureaucracy to figure out how to get that into practice. And I think what we're really giving them, we're giving them money, but we're also, I think, perhaps giving them the feel of what it's like to be in a big organisation and how to do business with that organisation.
I wonder if there's another utility in the world that has a $500 million investment. That is fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. Caroline?
We do a lot of partnerships as well. I think it's sort of the bread and butter maybe of a lot of utilities. You know, one of the things that we do, for example, especially focusing in electric transportation, is participate in a couple organizations that are helping to advance that in the consumer space, you know, working to try and make sure that consumers are aware of opportunities to go electric. So one example is Veloce, which is a nonprofit that includes electric utilities, automakers, charging companies, and then it also has the heads of many of the agencies in California that are responsible for part of that clean energy transition. So the head of the California Energy Commission, the head of the Air Resources Board, the head of the Public Utilities Commission. We have the transmission operator, the CAISO, represented, and so that collective helps to talk about the challenges so that we can all work on them together and hear about pinch points that where the utility can improve or where we're hearing something about where customer actions could be helpful. And together, working, we collectively support an advertising campaign to help consumer awareness grow. And so the Electric for All effort, electricforall.org, you can go and then see information around all the vehicles that are available, help you choose the vehicle that might meet your needs, as well as see programs that are being offered that could help buy down the cost of the vehicle. So that's just one example. Trio, our unregulated business that works with Fortune 500 and global Fortune 50 companies. They work with them on the analysis to help them on their purchases around the supply chain, around clean energy supplies. And they have a program called Transform, which working with automakers around their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Have a number of the automakers involved with that to help them with their journey, to their sustainability journey as well. So that's just 2 examples of the partnerships that we have going on.
So Amazon, since it's, we've been partnering with other corporations, with utilities, with regulators, really since we started to invest in clean energy. I think, as my colleagues mentioned, it's part and parcel of this work is true partnership. And what I mean by true partnership is joint investments, joint policy making, joint data sharing where possible. So real, it's not just a press release, but a true, true collaboration. I think the voluntary corporate purchasing movement that SEBA has deserves a lot of credit for. I mean, it just 110 gigawatts in voluntary procurement of renewable energy. I mean, clean energy, but primarily renewable energy since 2010. I mean, it's remarkable, and all of that has been done through different kinds of partnerships. I think one of the partnerships that we have recently founded is called the Emissions First Partnership, and that is focused on corporate accounting. And so, how do we look at greenhouse gas protocol accounting in terms of scope 2? In a way that allows for also investments in grids that need to leapfrog. And leapfrog, what I mean is hopefully not invest in fossil fuels first, but actually start with renewables, and how can corporates help that acceleration and that leapfrogging. And so that's a partnership that Amazon has developed with Salesforce and Meta and Rivian, and so there are, in addition to SEBA, some small, very focused corporate partnerships around different types of solutions, and that's one of the solutions that we're quite proud of, that we're working on with that community. But again, it's it is also at the most local of levels where like real true partnership really evolves, and where you can make that collaboration between the technological solutions, the energy solutions, clean firm power, to bridge that gaps to enable the 24/7 operation. And regulators. I think the consumer education piece has given me a lot of ideas that I'd love to talk with you about afterwards. So I think it's seeding as many elements as you can, and I think getting to the most local of levels is really where it does happen in the actual project development space.
I'm just going to acknowledge that I've done a lousy job of moderating because we are actually at time, and for some reason I thought that we were going to have a lot of time for questions here. So I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions, please. Please go ahead.
Hi. We are speaking about huge amount of increasing the electricity demand in the world, the Western world, in a lot of AI, a lot of data centers, a lot of energy demand, electricity car and so on. Maybe the leapfrog is to change the way of thinking, because all what I heard here is centralized managing of energy. And I think because a grid is something that it takes so long and so much effort and money to build, because we are speaking renewable energy and we are speaking distributed energy, maybe we have to think differently. And maybe we have to think how we're going to expand the grid in managing demand response. In smart grid technology, we have AI, we have how to produce how much energy would be needed in certain days of hours a day and days a year and so on. Maybe we can make a lot of off-grid, not 100% off-grid, but off-grid production, and to manage the off-on-grid together. And we have a lot of technologies that know how to do that, to make a smart grid. And it will be cheaper in the end than building more metal and more grid and more grids all over. Maybe we take the AI and the data centers and put them in more peripheral area, and it's cheaper to do underground infrastructure for connectivity, for how to say it in English, for transmission, data transmission underground than to transmit the electricity. So this is different, and it's much, much more cheaper. And how we take and make a lot of energy that it's not electricity, like hydrogen in pipes that can provide backup to the data centers with storage and with solar or wind energy, whatever. So maybe we have, in this kind of world where the amount of energy is going to be higher and higher and higher, to maybe go many years back and to think about a lot of small entities of electricity that will be managed together. It will be faster, it will be smarter, and more environmental. This for sure.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate the question. I do want to make sure, so certainly we see opportunities for existing technologies that we've used a long time. Energy efficiency. So let's continue to leverage energy efficiency, to reduce the amount of electricity demand that we see going forward. And continue to leverage distributed energy resources. When we look ahead to California, we see 50% of the homes having solar going forward with additional battery energy storage. So that's behind the meter, as well as the large-scale solar and wind and large-scale storage that's going to be needed to meet the overall system demands. Things like, so as we electrify more appliances and leverage vehicles, transport, are there ways to leverage those devices that now are using electricity to be a grid-enhancing asset, a grid reliability asset? So virtual power plants. That is absolutely something that we're already utilizing in California, expect to expand more going forward. So we see small being part of the larger grid solution, absolutely. We just don't see small being it cannot solve all the demands going forward. With data centers in particular, because the demand is so significant in one location, if you were to try and support that specific project with distributed energy resources, the amount of land you would need for that specific project would be pretty enormous. So, the data center footprint is quite small, but you try to put, let's just say it's 300 megawatts I was mentioning, 300 megawatts of solar or wind would take an enormous amount of land around it or near it or something to support just that one data center. And because they need 24/7, the amount of battery energy storage or backup to be able to provide the 24/7 continuity is also critical. So I think we continue to support from a system planning the demand overall versus just the specific need for that one project, and thinking about how to meet demands of specific customers, but from an overall system planning effort.
Time for one more question. Anyone? Oh, sir.
I thank you, Eric Holzer with the Edison Electric Institute. It was brought up earlier on the panel about the need for data providers often able to build big data centers that need 300 plus megawatts of energy in 7 months. And that's a much faster speed than the utility regulatory system is set up, at least in the States and maybe abroad. And I just wondered if you all could talk a little bit more about the implications of this going forward, as there's this, right, kind of two different directions. The people that are helping drive some of the demand and the growth of the data centers and AI are moving faster. You've got a utility system that moves slower. What are the implications of this going forward, and how do we address some of those?
Thank you, David. I live in Northern Virginia, and I think that question came from Northern Virginia, where all the data centers are being built. I'll pass it over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Eric. Look, I mean, regulators know they need to move faster, right? I think there is a consensus that they're going to have to be more agile, but ultimately, is any regulator going to be able to get to the stage where indeed, is any utility company going to get to the stage where they can build a completely new connection of that scale in 7 months, even if they had every bit of the regulator with them every stage of the journey? No. So I think it's pretty inevitable, and we're talking to regulators about this now, and I'm sure Caroline is as well. It's pretty inevitable. We're going to need anticipatory investment. We're going to need to try and figure out where these things need to join the grid over a long time, and we're going to need to persuade the regulator that it's going to be cheaper and quicker to put the infrastructure in place, anticipating that. There's an analogy actually in the UK. I mentioned that we'd sort of building out the grid very fast now because we hadn't built it out fast enough in the previous 5 years, and that was a similar sort of thing really, and it was at the supply side because we suddenly had all these wind generators. And now, I don't know if people are aware of this, but the system in the UK, there are costs if you ask a wind generator to switch off, and those costs go back to the bill player. And those costs used to be about £1 billion a year, and they're now £4.5 billion a year because we haven't built out enough grid. And I think you can do the same with the demand side by saying, what economic opportunities are you losing if you're routinely delaying someone that could have a data centre up and running in 7 months and it's taking them 3 years? And you've just got to do that. You've got to do the cost-benefit analysis. And I think the case is made for anticipatory investment when you do that.
Yes, and it's something that we are doing right now. So our 2025 rate case that we filed in 2023 was the first time we asked for anticipatory grid build-out, knowing that we're going to see so much electrification in California due to the goals that we have. So, and we know where the demand for instance, transportation electrification is going to be happening along the Inland Empire and the transportation routes between the ports of LA and Long Beach and the warehouses east of there. So we did ask to go ahead and make grid investments along that path in order to facilitate that transportation electrification that we don't necessarily have plans yet from a customer, but we know that it's going to be coming as a result of where California is heading. So that's just one example. One of the things that we already do today is put out maps of our service area and where we have capacity. So these capacity maps, we update monthly, and they're already available to customers to be able to see where there is available capacity as they're making their plans so that they know where they would face less delay in terms of being able to connect to the system. So that's another thing that utilities could be doing, I think, today if they wanted to help customers plan a little bit easier.
Okay, now we're going to go to the lightning round of concluding remarks. And since I'm joined here with the Optimist Club, we are going to, Carrie, can you kick us off with why you are optimistic? We are not gloom and doomers, we are optimists. So why are you optimistic? What gives you the most optimism today and moving forward?
I think in history, throughout time, you don't see innovation unless you're really challenged, right? And until you're challenged, until there's a real bottleneck, innovation is generally slow. And so I think we're in a situation where, for many different reasons, EV demand, fortunately, I think, at least right now, is going up. It has been very, very, it has been fluctuating. So I'm wary to say that as a consistent thing, but it is going up. Data center demand is going up. The demand for new technologies that will help the climate crisis are going up, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the grid. And so it is this moment where we can come together and despair, or it's this moment to come together and say, look at the most local of levels, and I think that comes back to the point earlier that that it shouldn't be about centralization. It should be about localization and really local partners, local innovation. We can do it mentality, and I think with that we will do a lot of really interesting new things, both within the U.S. in a country with aging infrastructure that has needed permitting and technological improvements for years, but also in many parts of the world that just need new grids, and we can facilitate the provision of energy access and help provide improved livelihoods for millions of people through an opportunity of increased demand. So I think for many reasons I'm optimistic.
I mean, it's Energy Day, so of course I'm optimistic on Energy Day. And it's hard not to be optimistic when you're at COP and you're talking to people who have the same commitment to achieving the goals set out by the Paris Accord, and I think we're seeing that commitment. I also just think at the end of the day, though, it's competition, and the United States is a global leader in competing with the best in terms of technology and innovation. And at the end of the day, the solution to this climate challenge is around technology and innovation. And it's where, like I said, the United States has been a leader, and I think will continue to be a leader. And it doesn't have to be about climate. It should be about competition and making sure that the United States continues to compete effectively on the global stage in an important area. And it's not about climate. It could be about readiness. It could be about reliability. It can be about security. And all those things are going to be important regardless of what party is in charge of the White House. It's important to our states. And that's, I think, you may have to shift the language a little bit, but at the end of the day, those are the things that ultimately, I mean, we as a country want. And I think that's, we saw that even in the first administration, a continued focus on battery energy storage around the national labs. And so I think I do stay optimistic that the United States will continue to invest in areas that will continue to improve its competitiveness globally.
Julie, your turn.
Thanks. So I suppose I'd sum it up by saying I think globally we're optimistic because we believe the energy transition is inevitable, that it has started, and that it will prove itself to be a far, far, far cheaper thing to do than not doing it. And obviously the theme of this COP is how it's all going to be paid for. That is a very difficult problem. But I'm also very conscious of something somebody from Bloomsburg said yesterday, the cost of not doing it, even in terms of really obvious costs like climate adaptation and resilience and insurance and all the things that are really visible, let alone all the human costs of not doing it, are much, much bigger. So we are optimistic that it is going to happen. I think the exact mix, to go back to the point about local versus national versus international solutions, the exact mix of how it's going to be is not known by anybody, and there's plenty of speculation, and it will ultimately come down to technology and business cases, and that's fine. But also we're really optimistic for our jurisdictions, for our communities we serve, and for our customers, because this is a massive opportunity for renewal. We are going to, in both jurisdictions, we are going to skill up thousands and thousands of young people to have really good quality jobs in a high-tech sector. We're going to offer our local communities, good quality economic opportunities, good quality infrastructure, which will support local businesses well beyond what we can do. So I just think it's difficult not to be optimistic about it. And people do fear change, but actually I've got an electric vehicle and it's much, much better.
Well, I'm optimistic because of everything that I've heard from my fellow panelists here. So let's give a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insights. Thanks to the America's All-In Pavilion. Thanks to WWF for helping to organize this session. I hope you found it as enjoyable and as informative as I did. Thanks a lot. Have a great day here at COP.